The leather chair creaked as David leaned back, his expression a perfect blend of concern and authority. "Grace, be reasonable," he said, spreading his hands on the mahogany desk. "My desk. The board made their decision. You need time to focus on your health." I gripped the armrests of my visitor's chair, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I was sick for 3 months, David. Not incompetent, not unstable. Just sick. My name is Grace Chen, and at 35, I was watching my husband use my temporary illness to steal a company I'd spent a decade building." "The board disagrees," he said smoothly, picking up a document from the desk. "According to Dr. Harrison's evaluation." "Dr. Harrison," I cut in. "Your friend from the country club? The one who never actually examined me." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "He's a highly respected physician who wrote an evaluation declaring me unfit to lead without ever meeting me." I leaned forward. "How much did that cost you, David? Or did he do it as a favor, like the time he wrote off your gambling debts as business expenses?" His expression hardened. "You're proving my point, Grace. These paranoid accusations aren't paranoid if they're true. 3 months ago, I'd been diagnosed with a severe case of pneumonia that landed me in the hospital. While I was recovering, David had orchestrated a silent coup, convincing a board that my illness was just a symptom of deeper problems. He'd used my absence to take control of Chen Innovations, the technology company my father had founded and I'd grown into an industry leader. "Your father would want what's best for the company," David said, playing his favorite card. "He would understand." "Don't." My voice was ice. "Don't you dare tell me what my father would want." David had never met my father, who died long before I met and married the man I thought was my perfect match. Successful, charming, supportive. Or so he seemed. Now I wondered if he'd been playing a long game from the start. "The decision is made," he said firmly. "The board has appointed me interim CEO. You'll retain your shares, of course, but operational control belongs to you." I finished. "How convenient." He sighed, the picture of patience. "Grace, please. You're still weak from your illness. Go home, rest. Let me handle things." But what David didn't know, what I discovered during my enforced rest, was that he had secrets of his own. Big ones. It started with an email sent to the wrong account. During my recovery, I'd been using my old laptop, the one David thought I'd gotten rid of years ago. One morning, as I was checking messages, I noticed something strange. Emails meant for David's private account were being forwarded to my old one. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I started reading. David had been busy during my illness, not just orchestrating my removal, but making deals. Secret deals. The kind that would destroy not just his reputation, but potentially the entire company. I stood up, smoothing down my suit jacket. "You're right about one thing, David. I do need rest. Time to recover." He smiled, probably thinking he'd won. "That's my girl. Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of it all." As I walked out of my former office, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos, my father's former assistant and the only person who knew what I'd discovered. "Meeting set for 2 p.m. Bring everything." I texted back a quick confirmation, then stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished metal. Pale from my illness, yes, but my eyes were clear and focused. David had no idea what was coming. The next few hours were crucial. While David sat in my office, playing CEO, I met with Maria at a small cafe across town. She'd worked for my father for 20 years before retiring, and she knew where all the bodies were buried, figuratively speaking. "He's gotten sloppy," she said, reviewing the emails I'd gathered. "Your father would never have allowed such obvious trails." I sipped my coffee, thinking about the empire my father had built from nothing. He'd come to America with $200 in his pocket and a dream of creating something lasting. Chen Innovations had been his life's work, and he taught me everything he knew about running it. "Look at this." Maria pointed to a particular email chain. "He's been moving money through shell companies, using the company's resources for personal ventures. Classic embezzlement." But it was worse than that. David hadn't just been stealing. He'd been making deals with questionable partners, the kind of people my father had always refused to work with. The Tang Group. I read the name with growing horror. They're practically a criminal enterprise. Dad turned them down multiple times. Maria nodded grimly. "David's promised them access to our new security protocols. Do you know what they could do with that technology? I did. Our latest innovation in cybersecurity could protect systems from almost any intrusion, or, in the wrong hands, create backdoors that would be nearly impossible to detect. He's going to destroy everything Dad built, I said quietly, unless we stop him. Maria reached into her bag, pulling out a worn leather notebook. Your father kept records of every deal he turned down, including the Tang Group. He documented exactly why they couldn't be trusted. I took the notebook, running my fingers over the familiar handwriting. Will it be enough? Combined with the evidence of David's embezzlement? It should be, but we need to move carefully. David has the board in his pocket, and the Tang Group. They're not known for their patience. My phone buzzed again. A text from David. Board dinner tonight. Don't worry about attending. You should rest. I showed the message to Maria, who snorted. He's not even trying to hide his condescension anymore. No, I agreed, he isn't. And that's going to be his downfall. We spent the next hour planning our next moves. The evidence was damning, but we needed to present it carefully. One wrong move and David could spin it as the delusions of his sick wife. Start with Howard Chen, Maria suggested, referring to my cousin who sat on the board. He never liked David, and he actually has a conscience. I nodded, making notes. Howard had been against David's appointment as interim CEO, but had been outvoted. He'd be a valuable ally. As I left the cafe, I felt stronger than I had in weeks. The pneumonia had taken its toll physically, but my mind was sharp, focused. David thought he'd taken advantage of my weakness, but he'd actually given me an opportunity. Sometimes, I reflected, people show their true colors when they think you're too weak to fight back. David had shown his, and now he would learn exactly why my father had chosen me to lead his company. That evening, while David was at the board dinner, I sat in my home office surrounded by documents. The notebook my father had left behind contained more than just rejected deal records. It was a roadmap of potential threats to the company, including detailed profiles of people like the Tang Group. My phone buzzed with a message from Howard. He's showing off at dinner, making big promises about the Tang partnership. When do you want to meet? I responded quickly, tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., the usual place. David had no idea that Howard and I had been meeting regularly since my recovery began. My cousin had been gathering his own evidence, watching David's every move with growing concern. A key turned in the front door, David returning from dinner. I quickly stored everything in my hidden safe, one David didn't know existed. It was behind a painting my father had given me, his favorite Chen landscape. Grace? David's voice carried up the stairs. Still awake. I heard him climbing the stairs, his footsteps slightly unsteady. He'd been drinking, celebration wine, no doubt. In here. I called out, switching my laptop screen to display innocent email. He appeared in the doorway, bow tie undone, cheeks flushed with wine and success. You should have been there, he said, his tone falsely sympathetic. The board is very excited about our new direction. Our direction, I kept my voice neutral, or yours? He waved his hand dismissively. Same thing now, isn't it? The Tang partnership is going to transform the company. We're talking billions in potential revenue. And what do they want in return? His eyes narrowed slightly. Just some basic cooperation on security protocols. Nothing major. Lies. According to the emails I've found, the Tang Group wanted complete access to our cybersecurity architecture. Access they could use to exploit vulnerabilities in banking systems worldwide. How are you feeling? He asked, changing the subject. Dr. Harrison mentioned you missed your follow-up appointment. Another lie. I'd never had an appointment with Harrison. I'm fine, I said. Getting stronger every day. Good. He loosened his collar. But no need to push yourself. Take all the time you need to recover. The way he said recover made it clear he hoped I never would, at least not enough to challenge his control. The next morning, I met Howard at a small diner far from our usual business haunts. He looked tired, his usually immaculate suit slightly rumpled. It's worse than we thought, he said without preamble. David's not just working with the Tang Group. He's been selling them information for months. Before your illness. I felt my stomach tighten. What kind of information? Everything. Client lists, security protocols, development plans. He's been setting this up for a long time, Grace. Your illness just gave him the opportunity to move openly. I pulled out my father's notebook, showing Howard the relevant entries. Dad knew about the Tang Group's methods. They infiltrate companies through partnerships, then strip them bare. Howard nodded grimly. They've done it before. But with our security technology, the damage could be catastrophic. We spent the next hour planning our countermove. The board needed to see evidence of David's dealings, but it had to be presented in a way that couldn't be dismissed as the ravings of a sick woman. Start with Jensen, Howard suggested, referring to our head of legal compliance. She's been asking questions about some of David's recent transfers. I agreed. Sarah Jensen had been my father's choice for legal counsel, and she had a reputation for uncompromising integrity. Later that morning, I met with Sarah in her office, making sure David was occupied with a client meeting. I've been waiting for you to come to me, she said as I laid out the evidence. These transactions, they're not just questionable, they're illegal. Can you help? She studied the documents carefully. This is enough to trigger a formal investigation. But Grace, if we do this, it has to be all or nothing. David won't go down quietly. I know. I thought about the way he used my illness, how easily he betrayed everything my father had built. But he has to be stopped. Sarah nodded, already reaching for her phone. I'll contact the SEC. They've been watching the Tang Group for years. This could be the break they need. As I left her office, I received a text from Maria. David's asking questions about the old files. Be careful. He was getting suspicious. Good. Let him waste time looking in the wrong places while we built our case. I spent the afternoon in meetings with potential allies, board members who had supported my father's vision, executives who remembered what Chen Innovations stood for before David's influence. Many were skeptical at first, conditioned by months of David's narrative about my instability. But the evidence was impossible to ignore, especially when paired with my father's meticulous records. By evening, a small but powerful coalition was forming. Even those who had supported David's appointment began to question their decision as they saw the scope of his deception. I returned home late, unsurprised to find David waiting in the living room. Busy day? He asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Just catching up with old friends, I replied. Doctor's orders, maintaining social connections is important for recovery. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Interesting, because I heard you had quite a few meetings at the office. For someone who's supposed to be resting. Are you having me follow David? Of course not. He stood, straightening his perfect suit. I'm just concerned about your well-being. We wouldn't want you to have a relapse. The threat was clear, but I just smiled. No, we wouldn't. That would be inconvenient for everyone, wouldn't it? The next morning, I arrived at the office early. The building was quiet. Most employees wouldn't arrive for another hour. Perfect timing for what needed to be done. I used my old security codes, which David hadn't thought to deactivate, to access the executive floor. My father had always said timing was everything in business. Today would prove him right. Sarah Jensen met me in the conference room, along with Howard and 2 SEC investigators. They'd been working through the night, building an ironclad case against David and the Tang Group. The evidence is overwhelming, the lead investigator said, reviewing the files. Money laundering, corporate espionage, fraud. Your husband's been busy. My phone buzzed. A message from our head of security. David just arrived. Heading up now. Right on time, I murmured. Is everything ready? Sarah nodded, straightening the papers in front of her. Board members are on their way. SEC has frozen the suspicious accounts. We're just waiting for. The conference room door burst open. David stood there, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. What is this? He demanded, then froze when he saw the SEC badges. Good morning, David, I said calmly. Please, join us. We were just discussing some interesting financial transactions. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the faces. Howard's grim determination, Sarah's professional detachment, the investigator's steady gaze. Whatever she's told you, he began, you have to understand. Grace has been unwell. Her perception of reality is perfectly clear, Howard cut in. Unlike your accounting practices, one of the investigators stood, producing a warrant. Mr. Chen, we have some questions about your dealings with the Tang Group. David's face hardened. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, looking directly at me. "The Tang Group won't take this lightly." No, I agreed, they won't, especially since the FBI is raiding their offices right now. That hit him like a physical blow. "What? Did you really think my father wouldn't have contingency plans for people like them?" I opened my laptop, turning it to show him the screen. "Every conversation you had, every deal you made, it's all here." Board members began filing in, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. David's supporters looked uncertain, seeing him rattled for the first time. "This is a mistake." David tried again, his voice losing its usual confidence. The board voted. The board voted based on false information. Sarah interrupted, distributing documents to each member, including a fraudulent medical evaluation from Dr. Harrison, who, coincidentally, is also being investigated. I stood up, facing the board members directly. "My father built this company on principles of innovation and integrity. David hasn't just betrayed those principles, he's betrayed everything we stand for." For the next hour, the evidence was presented methodically. Bank records showing David's embezzlement, emails documenting his deals with the Tang Group, proof that he'd been planning this takeover long before my illness. The security protocols he promised them, Howard explained, would have given them access to banking systems worldwide. The potential damage. David sat silently, his empire crumbling around him. The confident smile was gone, replaced by something darker, more desperate. "You don't understand," he finally said. "The Tang Group, they make promises. The technology they have is worthless." I cut in. "Did you really think my father would leave his life's work unprotected? The protocols you sold them, they're decoys. Sophisticated ones, but useless for actual implementation. That was my father's true genius, building safeguards into everything, protecting against exactly this kind of betrayal. The real security architecture was hidden deeper, accessible only to those who knew where to look." The board voted immediately, removing David as CEO and reinstating me. Within hours, the news hit the financial markets. Chen Innovation's stock dipped briefly, then rallied as the full story emerged, not of a company in crisis, but of one strong enough to root out corruption from within. David was led out by security, his personal items in a box. As he passed me, he paused. "I really did love you," he said quietly. "In the beginning." "No," I replied. "You loved what I represented. Access, power, control. You never loved me." The next few weeks were intense. The Tang Group's operations were exposed, leading to multiple arrests. David faced federal charges for his role in the scheme. Our company's reputation took a hit, but emerged stronger, more transparent. 1 month after David's arrest, I sat in my office, my real office, looking at my father's portrait on the wall. "You were right, Dad," I said softly. "Trust has to be earned, and once broken, it can never be fully repaired." Maria knocked on my door, bringing in a stack of papers. "The last of David's things from the house," she said, "and this was hidden in his desk." She handed me a small notebook. Inside, in David's precise handwriting, were notes dating back to when we first met. Everything had been calculated, meeting me, courting me, even his proposal. I was never his wife. I was his target. I closed the notebook, feeling strangely peaceful. "Have these sent to the FBI," I told Maria. "They can add it to their evidence." The sun was setting over the city as I finished my work that day. Chen Innovations was already bouncing back, our stock price higher than ever. The board had unanimously approved my new security initiatives, and client confidence was strong. David's trial would start soon. The Tang Group's leaders were facing international charges. And me? I was exactly where I belonged, leading the company my father built, stronger for having faced betrayal and emerged victorious. My phone buzzed with a message from Howard. Dad would be proud. I smiled, looking out over the city lights. Yes, he would be. Not just of saving the company, but of learning his most important lesson. True strength isn't about never falling, but about how you rise after being knocked down. David had thought my illness made me weak. Instead, it had made me stronger, more determined, more aware of who I could trust and who I couldn't. He had tried to use my weakness to destroy me, never realizing that in doing so, he had given me the power to destroy him. As I gathered my things to leave, I paused at my father's portrait. He had always said that business, like life, was about making the right choices at the right time. David had made his choices. I had made mine. And in the end, integrity had won over greed, truth over deception, strength over exploitation. That was my father's true legacy, not just a successful company, but the wisdom to know that real power comes from using your strength to protect what matters, not to destroy what others have built.